Hey, welcome back to the MMA Prospectus. We have had a brief 2 week hiatus, trying to do some restructuring now that Pat has abandoned us to go wander in the wilderness and do heavy hands because heavy hands is awesome and no argument there. Um, we are, well, nonetheless marching forward, and uh, we have two big cards ahead of us. I'm joined by, as always, Tom Grant to talk over the prospects of these two big UFC cards. One big UFC card and one card that nobody seems to care about coming up here.
Card is that?
That's the TUF 21 finale, Tom.
The what?
The Ultimate Fighter. They ran another season of the Ultimate Fighter. It
Really?
I didn't watch it. Nobody seemed to like it, and they are having the finale. So
They're having it the day after UFC 189,
right, that's right.
so they don't want anyone to watch it.
No, as of yesterday, let me see. I can go back to UFC.com here and take a look. But as of yesterday, they did not have all the fights listed for it yet on the website. Yes, now they have all the fights listed. But up until yesterday, they only had 7 fights listed for the card officially.
Wow.
So,
Well,
and that's not even like, you know, that obviously there's some tough finalists there, but there were some fights that were announced months ago
yeah,
that were not put publicly on that card until yesterday.
yeah. There's some decent, and there are some decent fights on that card too. I mean, like it's
Yeah,
not a bad card. It's just getting.
no,
It's not like it is definitely like a free TV or like Fight Pass sort of card, but it's also like it, it's been put in a position where people are just going to utterly ignore it.
yeah. I mean, it's tough to to follow that, especially when people are not looking out for it. There, especially when people maybe like, they spent all day Saturday watching UFC, and then Sunday comes up, and it's like, well, I actually would like to do some of the shit that I plan to do this weekend, rather than spend another day watching UFC. For hardcore fans, they'll be there, they'll be watching it. I'll be watching it because I gotta, but it's not a card that you're gonna get capture any casual fan interest
Well,
for.
and it's not like there's not going to be another one on. Isn't there? There's one on Wednesday.
Yep.
There's another one on Saturday, and then there's another one. There's the card in Chicago the weekend after that. So we're
Yep.
getting UFC overload right now, or we're about to start the 10-day period of just UFC absolute overload.
Yeah, I believe somebody calculated or tallied it up, and there are 100 fighters fighting over 2 weeks for the UFC. Yeah, so no shortage of cards for fans, and you know, casual fans are really only going to pay attention to the really big publicly. They'll pay attention to this one, and then they'll pay attention to UFC or the UFC on Fox card, maybe, and that's about it.
Yeah,
But we are here to talk about these two cards, and especially to talk about the up and coming fighters on them. Especially on UFC 189, we have some, three, well, two blue chip and one like no turquoise chip prospects on this UFC 189 card. Talk about. And well, actually, I guess you could say three turquoise chip prospects, two blue chippers.
yeah.
Um,
There's quite a bit of young talent on this card, and it should.
yeah.
Yeah, this card, the 189 card tomorrow is just going to be outstanding. I cannot wait for this one.
Who's your one fighter that you're really excited for?
Uh,
One
outside of like the obvious like main event and all that, like if we're talking guys that we talked
prospect.
about practice, I want to see Brandon Thatch and Gunnar Nelson. That's the fight I'm really looking forward to. I think it's most likely that Brandon Thatch obliterates Gunnar, but there's just enough intrigue there, like considering especially Brandon Thatch's last fight, struggling with the Benson Henderson, and then eventually getting choked out with him, that makes it an interesting fight. And I that's the fight I'm probably most looking forward to out of all the prospect matches.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the thing with that fight too is that Brandon Thatch didn't really struggle with Benson Henderson early.
No, he did not.
Like early in that fight, it's not like Brandon Thatch was getting taken down and outworked and showed really bad takedown defense and was overwhelmed. He was beasting Benson Henderson in the cage, just lighting him up. And then as time went on, fight got later, he got more tired. Some of the limitations of his game started to show up, and Henderson was able to take advantage and beat him. But you're basically, looking at this fight with Gunnar Nelson, that there's a real question of like, is Nelson a good enough fighter to survive that kind of early onslaught? Because he's not nearly as good a striker as Benson Henderson.
No, he's not. But also, I think one thing that happened, Henderson early on had to contend with a pretty big size difference in that match. And Gunnar Nelson, still smaller than Brandon Thatch, not quite as small as Benson Henderson. But the biggest thing with Gunnar Nelson is his striking is just not great. It's just not very good. And I do think I used to kind of talk about Gunnar Nelson's game, especially when he first came to the UFC, as being very much disjointed. And while the Rick Story fight obviously isn't going to go down for Gunnar Nelson as a good fight for him, watching that fight, his game looked more interlocked in that match than it ever had previously before. And I wonder if the Rick Story fight was a combination of him fighting a level of fighter he hadn't really faced yet in terms of experience and skill, but also kind of him kind of trying to play like the high-level MMA metagame for like the real first time and going through some growing pains. Because I think people forget that that fight wasn't a blowout. That was a pretty close fight, especially through 3 rounds. Like through 3 rounds, it was really later in the fight where Rick Story really established himself on the outside striking that he took over that fight.
It's true. It wasn't a blowout, and Nelson is still a very good fighter. I mean, I think the interesting thing with him is just that, like, he isn't. He's actually, let me see. Yeah, he isn't as quite as young in the sport as you might think for somebody as young as he is. And
yeah.
And neither is Brandon Thatch, for that matter. Like, they're both kind of guys who are at the borderline of prospect idea, even though and Thatch is a few years older than Nelson. But I don't know, like Nelson, I think he's we're seeing him kind of, maybe we'll see him click a bit better late, but I think he's an interesting case for this idea of something that I've been kind of redeveloping and reevaluating lately, which is this idea of the whole prospects get 9 years idea that we have had, and I think, is generally a very solid idea. And it's that somebody like him, who it started so young, he turned pro when he was like 18, 19.
Yeah.
He might, he could still, he could develop later, be good later, have a much longer sort of career in the sport, 12 or 14 years maybe, but he may just not have the same like consistent dominant peak that we see other fighters have.
I think that's very possible, and especially Gunnar has like a really odd sort of development. He came into the sport in 2007 and he looked really good. Obviously, he started out in karate. That was his like childhood martial art, and then he found jiu-jitsu and is like he is like a prodigy level sort of dude in jiu-jitsu. And then like he just took time out of his training and he fought once in 2008 and basically spent all of 2009 working on his jiu-jitsu, and he went to ADCCs and did pretty darn well there. And then he came back for 2010, and then he took another 2 years off to work on his wrestling and apparently became really good at wrestling, just like in a pure wrestling context. And then he came back to MMA, and he hadn't really worked on his striking that much. And he had worked on these skills in isolation, but I think we saw he didn't really develop the way people thought he would, because he had never really worked on putting his skills together. And if he fought dudes that he could beat in like a certain skill area and he could get it to that area, he did very well. And then Rick Story kind of made him fight like a complete MMA fight. And Nelson looked like his game was starting to gel together, but it just wasn't there at the time. And I think Brandon Thatch is going to present some real problems for Gunnar, because Thatch is good in all the places where Gunnar is, inexperienced, but in the same way, then it kind of reverses. Thatch is really good at range, and he's a murderer in the clinch. Gunnar's not a slouch in the clinch. He's just not a striker in the clinch.
Yeah.
Positional. He's got really good takedowns. He's really good at getting off the cage, but Thatch is just the knees and the elbows in the clinch are pure violence. So I think this fight ends up being Gunnar getting beaten up, because on the outside he's not a super impressive striker. He's accurate. He's technically sound, but it's karate striking, so it's like one punch, one kick, and the head is straight up, and not a lot of taking the head offline, and a lot of reliance on moving straight back to get out of danger. So I think Thatch probably knocks Gunnar out at some point. But if Gunnar can turn this into like a cage grappling match or get it down to the ground, I think Gunnar's got a real chance of either winning a decision or just outright submitting Thatch.
Yeah, I would be surprised if Gunnar got this to the ground. I would be surprised if he couldn't submit Thatch, because quite frankly, Thatch's ground game, what we saw of it in his fight against Benson Henderson, looked raw. It looked really just like he's the kind of fighter that when he gets put down on the ground, he panics and tries to athlete his way back to his feet. Just kind of try and burst back to his feet as quick as possible. And that usually leads to putting yourself in bad positions where you get choked out,
Yeah. Story had success. I mean, he got taken down by Gunnar a couple times and was able to pop back up to his feet. Now, Story obviously much more experienced and a much more calm and technical in his stand-up. So I think for both fighters, this is very much like a can Gunnar, if he gets Thatch down, can he keep him down and force the ground game? And for Thatch, can you face like a lesser version of Benson Henderson? Can you Gunnar's probably better on the ground just in pure jiu-jitsu sense than Benson. But in terms of overall MMA package, what he brings to the table is similar to what Henderson does, but not quite as good. So I think for both guys, it's a nice solid test fight.
It is. I'd be lying if I said I was sure that either man was going to win it. I think that I think it makes sense to see Thatch hurting Nelson early and taking over the fight from there, but I would not be at all surprised. It's an interesting point of development too, because as we say, both these guys have taken kind of slow roads. Thatch we think of as this bright young prospect who's just now entering the scene for MMA, but he started fighting back in 2008. He's been in this sport for going on 7 years now.
Yeah, dude has Strike Force. Dude has a Strike Force fight. I mean,
a 2008 Strike Force fight.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's a. I forgot it was a Playboy Mansion one.
Yeah,
that was wow. Who was the main event of that one? I have to check this real quick. That was Joe Riggs was main eventing that.
Was he? No, This was Trevor Prangley, Anthony Ruiz.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forget. This is the old. These are the old
reverse order.
Yeah. Oh man,
or maybe it was Misaki Riggs. I don't know. Either way.
Wow. That is, Brandon Thatch, he's been around for a lot longer than I think people realize, because most people tend to gauge guys we talked about by age. Oh, he's in his 20s and he's fighting in the UFC. He must be new in the sport.
Yeah. It really doesn't work that way. In general, guys get. I will say this though. I do think for guys who come in like Thatch with a striking game, and maybe not early on a terribly nuanced striking game, it does take them longer to get everything to click. There's a reason that Thatch's game is just starting to click now, and it's because it takes that much time to become a really great technical striker. And to have your striking game click so well that now you can dominate guys, despite the fact that you're not a wrestler and you're not a grappler, and all you're really doing is brawling at a very advanced level.
Yeah, I think that's to develop a striking game. It takes a lot of time and a lot of experience, in-ring experience, and I think that's partially because in wrestling and jiu-jitsu and grappling, you can get full speed experience every day in the gym. You know, like every day you go into the gym, you can get that full speed experience. You can't do that in striking. You know, you cannot. And so like in grappling, it's a matter of like, how hard do you push yourself in the gym? Can you get competition level, like, you know, rounds in or rolls in the gym? You can't get competition level like spars in the gym on a consistent basis. So it takes a lot of getting in there to like really refine your craft. And you know, like you only probably like from all the training you do in a week, you probably only take like less than 1% of it to an actual fight. It takes a long time to kind of build up that technical base.
Yeah, and I would argue too that just, and this is very much like armchair sports analysis from me, so take it with a grain of salt, that it's because it's so much more reliant on distance control and hand-eye coordination, there's a lot, and timing even, like it's just harder to pick up the nuances. It's harder to learn, like, okay, I actually have to feint someone with several strikes to set up something in the future in which they have to be the proper distance away and I have to throw, you know, this like this. Whereas when you're grappling, like you actually get your hands on somebody and you know where their arms and legs are, you know how their body's positioned. So you know, you have to learn how to go through and set up all these motions. And yeah, there's still like grappling feints and all sorts of things like that.
But it's tactile. You can feel them the whole way through. I think that's part of it too, and it's part of like why even within the grappling community, guys talk about how it takes a little bit longer to learn takedowns and stand up than it does to learn ground fighting, because ground fighting has a much more tactile element. There are less forces in play and less variables in play when the ground is taking away one fighter's mobility.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that not that many fighters shoot an awesome power double. Like, that actually takes some skill to some like timing and real practice to execute. Whereas, you know, you see a lot more guys, they get the fight to the cage, they go for the low single, they switch to it, you know, to getting the hands a double and hands clinch behind, and then they move and twist and take down. And like that's a much more sort of like a much easier process to learn than how to like set up a proper shot from the outside and get in on somebody's hips and get through their hips.
Yeah, it's all like the craft you got to learn in all of them, but it takes time. But you can learn. I think the best thing at conversations I've had with people is that if you take someone and you give like 6 months of training, and you take someone into like a grappling gym, and all right, you give this guy 6 months of ground training, and then this guy 6 months of like takedown training, and then you come back and look at them on their first day, and then on the end of that 6 month mark, there's going to be a marked difference in the guy working on the ground, whereas the guy working on his feet, that you're not going to see that much of a difference.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's also why we see grapplers are so dominant at the regional level. I mean, the dominant fighter that you see when you're looking at regional prospects, the guy you're likely to see with like a 10-0 record, is a guy who has like 10 first-round submissions, you know? And it's because it's a lot easier to, like, you're not only are you facing a lot of grapplers at that level, but it's a lot easier to develop that skill to be better than the rest of your field at it.
I think part of that is also you get a lot of guys who focus exclusively on grappling at the regional level, and then when they go in there and they get guys who are, you know, I mean, this isn't a huge shock when we talk about the fact that like a lot of smaller camps tend to have real coaching deficiencies. Because I've obviously, like in my time, I've worked with black belts who have done like, we kind of call it like for show MMA careers. They like do a couple MMA fights to just have it on their resume. And they'll go in there and you get a guy with like, you know, 10 years of black belt experience, and he's going in against a dude who's been fighting MMA for 3 years. And like, he's been doing MMA for 3 years, and he's learned like a few things on the ground, and then they hit the mat, and then it's like, oh, well, like this is a total skill disparity. And that tends to be a lot of it too. But yeah, I think that the fact that like you get the guys who can pile up the submission wins, it's for a lot of factors, but part of it is that like in general, the grappling level on regional MMA can be very, very bad.
Yeah. But I mean, but the striking level is very, very bad too. It's just that it's a lot harder. Like it's a lot harder to be a much better striker than the field early in your career, unless you
Yes.
came from a long striking background already.
Yep.
It's not harder to be a much better grappler than the rest of your field earlier than your career, even without a huge grappling background. It's something I think that certain fighters, you see a lot more like phenom grapplers. I feel like.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the I lost it. I was gonna
You'd agree with that, and phenom grapplers.
the phenom grappler syndrome you see a lot where you get guys that come out of nowhere. And I do think it's a lot of times people talk about it's mat time, like how much mat time can you get in, how much of a focus do you put on it, and yeah, in general, it is a no, I completely lost it. Let's just move on.
Okay, moving on. The fight, the fighter I'm most excited about on this card personally, and I don't know. I feel like he's almost going under the radar because a lot of people are, really marking out over Thomas Almeida, and I'm marking out over Thomas Almeida. But I'm really excited to watch Cody Garbrandt destroy some dude.
Yeah.
Like, really thrilled to watch that. Maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe that's cruel of me and heartless of me. But I am really excited to see him just go in there and absolutely beat the snot out of some kid.
Yeah, no, I'm if there's a single, like if we're talking single prospects, like he's a really exciting one to follow. Like if we're talking about like a blue chip athlete, big power, clean boxing, and then he gets in there with intentions to hurt someone. And I mean, he's not fresh off. I mean, he beat the snot on Marcus Brimage, but this was at the beginning of the year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beat the snot out of Marcus Brimage, and now he's in there and against. It's
a tough Latin America.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a tough Latin America. I was trying to remember which season. Is it a season 1 guy?
Yeah, well, the season 2 hasn't even happened yet.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, no. I mean, a tough. This is purely they're feeding him a warm body. This is gonna be a destruction. And Cody Garbrandt is a legitimate blue chip prospect that everyone should be following.
Yeah, I mean, it's that rare combination of somebody who came up with a long amateur boxing background and a good wrestling background as well. Like he was a good high school wrestler and a longtime amateur boxer, and he uses both of those skills in he's not. It's not like the sort of like, oh, and he's a great offensive wrestler all the time, although he can hit some takedowns. But it's that sort of ideal of the striker who has excellent takedown. It's a modern sprawl and brawl game. It's he's playing the same basic game that somebody like Joanna Jędrzejczyk is playing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and kind of talking about that is like to go back to our previous conversation, is that he's able to implement this because he has a really good grasp of how wrestling works and how to stop takedowns before they start with his wrestling background. Mm-hmm. And then he's also got the athleticism to implement a blitz striking game. Like his power is the kind that ends fights quickly. And this is actually the point that I lost in the last thing, is that implementing a striking game early in your career can also be really difficult if you're not like a blue chip athlete, because striking is very hard to finish a fight quickly if you're not a big time puncher. Even against a guy who is significantly less skilled than you, you still have to break them down, kind of find their patterns, get your rhythm going, and then establish yourself. And that's something that's not necessarily easy to do if you're not super experienced with it. And especially in MMA, when you've got guys who are looking for any hole to get in, close, clinch, take you down. Garbrandt has the wrestling experience, and he has that fight-ending power that basically – the combination of the two, I mean, opponents are wary to even get near him.
Yeah.
I expect him to continue to progress to become a pretty exciting striker at 135. Kind of what people are, I think, what more along the lines of what people hope John Lineker would be at like flyweight. I think Garbrandt's going to be.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, he basically what I said about his debut, which I expected to be close, and I mean, he beat Brimage and did a great job of it. But what I said in his debut was that he's taken 3 years to get to the same point that it took Brimage 8. You know,
Yeah.
it took or 7 at that time. Like it took Brimage twice as more than twice as long to get to the same point in his career as Cody Garbrandt is walking into the UFC, and that is a sign of a real phenom talent who has a
Yeah.
lot to show. So then we got to talk about the other bantamweight hot shit prospect on here, which is Thomas Almeida, and I get that he's like he's a fighter that people are legit excited about and they're hyping him and the hype is driving the odds and that's why he's a landslide favorite. But I do think this is actually like a good step in the right direction for him against Brad Pickett.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Thomas Almeida he's a little less of a physical beast. He's a less than a physical beast than Cody Garbrandt, but he's much more of like a polished product at this point. And I think that's reflected also in the matchmaking, that they're giving him a Brad Pickett, who Pickett's not exactly, he's not the guy he was even 3 years ago. At this point, he's not a top 10 dude anymore. He's not going to be threatening to anyone who is a strong contender in that division, but he's a good test for a young fighter like Almeida. And I do expect Almeida to win, though there are ways that Pickett could give him trouble or potentially even beat him.
Yeah.
What I like most about Almeida is the fact that the diversity of his offense. He throws pretty much every strike, and he'll throw it to the head, to the legs, and to the body. And it was the liver shot his liver shot is outstanding. It's really what got the ball rolling against Yves Jaboyne in what can only be described as a murking by Thomas Almeida.
I think Pickett. I mean, Pickett's still tough. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah,
and we've already seen that when faced with somebody who is really tough, like Tim Gorman, that was Almeida's debut. Like Almeida can struggle a little. He can have some trouble with somebody that is just not going to go away when he hits them a bunch. And Brad Pickett is a guy that he may be slowing down. He may have lost a step. He may no longer be, he may no longer be getting the close fights that he used to get, or winning the close fights that he used to get. But he's still pushing a close fight, and he's still shown himself to be a good wrestler, grappler, and. I would say that Almeida's a more polished striker than Cody Garbrandt. Like he's a more varied offensive striker, and he has more polish in that striking. But he's a less polished wrestler. Like he is a much less nuanced. He has much less nuanced takedown defense. Is much more apt to be put on his back, and we haven't seen him get held there yet so much. But it's still. Yeah,
I would completely agree with you. I'd put Almeida's defensive wrestling at like average or just above average.
Mm-hmm.
And really what has kept guys off of him has been his ability to get back up, and then just the fact that he pushes a ridiculous pace on the feet.
Yep.
And so that after you shoot your takedown, there's no rest after he stands back up, and by the end of the fight, he's the fresher guy.
Yeah.
And Pickett, I think Pickett's going to be game for the first 2 rounds in this. I think it's going to be a really good fight, and I do agree that we could see what Thomas Almeida looks like off his back for extended periods of time in this fight, and maybe that's enough for Pickett to eke out a decision. So I think
we could also see Pickett really just get run over for the first time in a long time in his career.
Yeah, I think it's another good matchmaking that's going to tell us something about. It's going to tell us something about Almeida. We're going to learn something about Almeida, and it's going to be a fun fight. No matter, I think even if it ends up being Pickett kind of holding Almeida down, I think just kind of getting to see what Almeida does will be interesting enough that it'll be a fun fight either way.
Yeah, which brings us to our third prospect. Well, actually, we've been through the other 2, Gunnar Nelson and Brandon Thatch. So our 6th. Let's see it. Is that right? No, 5th. 5th. There we go. Numbers. And this is one of the guys that I considered sort of a turquoise chip, which is Alex Garcia.
Alex Garcia. Yeah, no. I think the biggest thing that makes Alex Garcia exciting is that he is, again, another one of those freak athletes. Like, he's a huge physical specimen. And he's got really hard punching. And then when he takes you down, it is not like a little ankle pick, you fall on your ass sort of takedown. He puts you down with some big time authority. And then he beats the hell out of you from the top. I think there's a lot of polishing to be done in Alex Garcia's game. But he very much at this point, he kind of reminds me of like Cuban fighters, like when we like what we see like the Hector Lombards and like the Yoel Romeros, of just like a lot of physicality, a lot of power, and then we're kind of developing like the early stages of their careers, where everything else is then kind of developing around it. And I think he's in the right place at TriStar to kind of make that happen. I mean, if there's ever a coach that just really wants like a lump of like raw athleticism, it's Firas Zahabi.
Yeah.
And I think getting to fight Mike Swick it will be interesting, because I mean, like, Swick only has like 20 fights, but he's been fighting since like a lot of MMA fans, like current MMA fans, were in grade school.
1998.
Yeah. So like he's been around a long time, despite the fact that he really doesn't have that many fights.
Yeah.
So I'm really not that big of a believer in Swick at this point, needless to say. I think this is Alex Garcia's fight to go out there, really kind of test out your new game against a veteran. And then even if things don't go perfectly, kind of come away with the win anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised if Mike Swick could beat Alex Garcia, frankly, at this point. Like, I expect despite the fact that speed and power were always sort of keys of Swick's game, I expect him to look really outgunned here in that like raw athletic ability.
Yeah. The days of quick Swick are long gone. There's a different tier of athlete. There's like 3 more tiers of athlete that have been stacked on top of what used to be like an elite athlete back in like 2004.
Yeah, there really is. So I'm excited to see, interested to see Garcia, because I think, I'm not sure if I think he came into MMA just as an MMA native without any secondary skills. Maybe he had a wrestling background of some sort, but I'm not sure. But it definitely seems like he's evolving as sort of an MMA native, in which like every part of his game, there's no like terrible part of his game,
but there's no standout.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's a great athlete, and everything is kind of coming along slowly but surely.
Yeah, and I think I think that's shown itself in like his run in the UFC has not been like smooth. It's been some pretty, I mean, like obviously Neil Magny, got him in the amazing year of Neil Magny. And then I mean he struggled with Sean Spencer for long stretches. So I think we're seeing a guy that's very much kind of figuring out like where his strengths are going to end up being against higher level fighters.
Yeah, against guys that he can't punch once and knock them out.
Yeah.
He has to work, and that's one of the things with like, especially when we talk about like why it takes longer for strikers to develop too and look good, especially, is that, even if a guy's got big power and good mechanics, if they're not a consistent, like a high output or consistently accurate striker, it's like, you'll see a guy land a punch that could knock somebody out or like hurts them, but they can't follow up well enough to actually finish a fight. And so, it's that idea. You see a lot of power punchers early in their career where they'll hit somebody really hard and hurt them really badly, and then they're trying to follow it up for like a round and a half, a lot of which they might even be losing, just because they can't find that guy's chin again. They don't have the consistency in their striking game to actually follow through on hurting someone. So that may be what we're seeing with Alex Garcia, is that when he was on the regional scene, he was like a big knockout and submission artist finisher. And then as he's faced guys like Spencer and Magny, who are, Spencer for his flaws is a really tough fighter.
Yeah.
And Magny too is just, these are both really tough, hard to finish fighters. And now, Garcia isn't finishing them. And when he's not finishing them, they're giving him fits.
Yeah, no, and it's one of those things that we talk about it, that for all the talk about how the UFC's roster has grown so huge and that like being a UFC fighter doesn't mean what it used to mean, there's still a pretty strong difference between guys who can consistently hang around on the UFC roster and regional level fighters. And because of the expanding UFC roster and the number of shows they're doing, a guy like Alex Garcia is having to figure this out while in the UFC, whereas in previous years he might have had, instead of having the Ben Wall and Sean Spencer fights, he may have had 2 or 3 more regional fights to kind of like continue to suss out his game before getting into the UFC and fighting somebody. So it is nice to see that I think especially 2015, I think we've seen an adjustment in UFC matchmaking in which they are giving prospects better matched, more developmental fights. And when they give them fights that are like bigger fights, like the Gunnar Nelson, Brandon Thatch fight, there's a specific reason for the fight rather than just let's put these 2 guys together and see who wins.
Yeah, there are at points. I still think that at times they get some weird matches in there where you're just like, it seems like you might be throwing one of these guys, like you're going to tank one of these prospects right here, but it happens a lot less often, definitely. Yeah. And this is Garcia, this is a win. This shouldn't be a tough fight for him. Like, honestly, I think this is a name maker fight for him. If he can go out there and just bury Swick, then it could be the kind of fight that wakes a lot of people up and like, oh man, I know who Mike Swick is, and this guy just like melted him.
Yeah.
So, we'll see. Otherwise, is there anything else that I really wanted to get into on this card? I wanted to talk a bit about Rory MacDonald along with this idea of like the long-term prospects, like the guy who starts young and then has like the uneven development curve or the long development curve.
Yeah.
Because that is something that I am continually sort of concerned with Rory MacDonald, because he's only 25, but he's been fighting for a decade now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he is quite – October 15th will be the 10-year anniversary of his first fight.
Yep. And that, like, I don't think that Rory MacDonald's about to fall off a cliff. I do think that he'll be good up to his 30s.
Mm-hmm.
But I do wonder if, like, it does give me pause about the idea of him as a champion or a long-term champion, because I do wonder if it's like something that, just with the amount of wear and tear he's already put on his body and the time he's already had in the sport, like, can he be a consistent performer as a champion?
Well, and that, I mean, it gets into interesting questions in terms of like how, like, I wonder how much of his struggles have been like more inconsistency, and part of it I think is matchmaking. I mean, I think there's a case to be made that Rory MacDonald struggles against lefties because it took him a while to get things going against Tarek Saffiedine. It took, obviously, Robbie Lawler was throwing him off all fight. Like, he really, I feel like he really had trouble of what to make with Lawler in that fight. And based on an interview I heard actually with Patrick Wyman on Heavy Hands, it sounded as if Faraz actually thought that Rory didn't take Robbie Lawler as seriously as he should have in the lead up to that fight. That there was some like, it's like that old guy, I'll be able to take him, and then was very surprised how game Robbie was still. But I think with Rory, I think we're just done seeing the giant leaps. That I think that's pretty clear. We're done seeing the giant leaps that everyone's expecting. He's in the phase of his career where he is polishing his game. He's going to be adjusting his game, but all the gains we're going to see in like his fighting ability are going to come in inches. And they may assert themselves in big ways, against Robbie Lawler. But like, you know, against Robbie Lawler, if he kind of has more of an answer for Lawler's pocket presence, if he has more of a way to close in distance than just his jab, which is an excellent jab, but I mean, Robbie had answers for his jab in that fight, and MacDonald never really adjusted. I think I wonder if we are seeing consistent Robbie Lawler, like, because I mean, thinking back even to like, you think back to like the 2010 Robbie Lawler lost to Carlos Condit, and now you picture him from like 2012 on, from the Che Mills destruction on, like we've seen
Rory MacDonald. Sorry,
yeah, that Rory,
2010 Rory MacDonald, not Robbie Lawler. Right?
Yeah, no, the 2010 Rory MacDonald. From like 2012 to now, I think we've seen something like something close to the same guy getting in the cage time.
Yeah, I would argue that. I think we are actually. It is interesting because it does feel like we are seeing a fighter in his prime right now from MacDonald. We are seeing that consistent level of output. So, I mean, maybe we won't see the inconsistency. That may just be something that like I'm overdeveloping. I'm trying to make the theory fit every situation, which is a dangerous thing to do. But it does just give me it is interesting because when you get fighters who start that young, it's so difficult to figure out how, you know, like what does a fighting career look like for somebody who turns pro at 15.
Yeah, and then there's also the issue of, you know, what do you do with these guys who like start in MMA? Like,
yeah,
I mean, because I feel like there's a case to be made that like when you see guys like that you stop seeing the big leaps faster than you do like in a guy like when you see like a top level wrestler come in, where you'll continually see big jumps in his game as he adds new pieces. And I feel like in the guys who kind of come in from like no background, their first gym is an MMA gym, I kind of feel like we stop seeing those leaps faster. Like earlier in their career, we stopped getting the leaps because at some point, you know, the wrestler is learning how to integrate skills he's had his whole life into his game, and then suddenly he has like a new toy, like a new punch or something else that he feels really comfortable with, and then it's all about working it in with what he already has. Whereas like a guy like Rory is like constantly trying to evolve everything. Like there is no one skill set that he can just fine tune and not have to worry about like trying to like continually bring the level up.
it's true that it is not the case of like talking about somebody like Francisco Rivera, where, you know, for a long time he was just kind of this power punching brawler, and now suddenly like his boxing has actually clicked.
Yeah.
And there's been like a major leap. And with Rory, I mean, for a while now, we've seen like this very, you know, cautious sort of jabbing and pressuring fighter who's good at cutting off the cage, who can wrestle and, you know, grapple and has all the parts to his game. But we're not seeing it like, I would say the Saffiedine fight was a moment where it did feel like maybe something more had clicked. It was really the first fight that I can think of where he really, you know, adjusted his striking to meet and beat someone clearly over time. But, you know, because rather than like the BJ Penn fight or the Tyron Woodley fight where he just had an advantage from the beginning and pressed it, the Saffiedine fight felt like this is an even fight for 2 rounds. And then suddenly Rory's like, oh, wait, no, this is how I beat you this way. And then adjusted and did it. And that, I mean, that is something that I think has clicked maybe a bit more. And it'll be interesting to see if he can carry that into this Lawler fight. Because Lawler isn't going to give him the space that Saffiedine gave him. And I don't know. It's just, Rory MacDonald is... He's a puzzle. He's somebody that you almost want to model like MMA development off of because he's such a strange outlier in the sport.
Yeah, and I think it is because, I mean, obviously for a long time we had it kind of played up that the guys who trained MMA from being like a 10-year-old are going to be the ones to take over this sport. And fairly or unfairly, Rory MacDonald kind of got that flag planted on him by Joe Rogan and in some of his early fights. But then obviously we've had guys in the sport that kind of had that background already. I mean, like George St. Pierre being one of them, who like, yeah, he came from a karate background, sort of, but like really wasn't anything until he started doing MMA. Or even like Carlos Condit, a guy who beat Rory MacDonald, kind of came from that background. But I think it's a really interesting, his career is just going to be really interesting to look back on and kind of say, like, was there an overestimation of what he could do, or did he live up to what we thought he could do? Or like, is there just is it still a big advantage being a specialist coming in? Yeah. Like, I think there's something to that. I think there is something to the fact that, like, if we're talking about welterweights, that, like, you know, we're talking about a guy like, you know, Damian Maia still, who I think part of the reason why Maia is continuing to be relevant and able to compete and train so effectively is because there's an aspect of his game that he does not have to worry about continuing to develop. Like, his jiu-jitsu game, he just has to tweak. He just has to go back and adjust. It's not something he's constantly trying to, like, having to bring the level up with everything else because, you know, because he doesn't need to. It's already at such a high level to the point where it's not something that's going to atrophy if he doesn't, like, roll 3 times a day, you know, at least 3 times a week.
Yeah, it's true. And it makes like I say, it makes this whole thing with MacDonald and this title fight, because I mean, I you know, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for him to win the title. And I think it's reasonable for people to pick him to do it. I'm kind of picking Lawler because I like Lawler so much and I want to see him succeed. But I think, you know, long term, it makes me more interested in this idea of, does Rory MacDonald win the title and then keep it? Can he be a dominant champion if he wins the title? And that's where I really start to, that's where I wonder about the whole specialist idea and the idea of the, you know, and the idea of starting when you're that young. Like, how do those things play into his career over the next 5 years? And is it, you know, something that we see him just have this extended run of fantastic dominance, or do we see a whole lot of inconsistency crop up as he becomes a guy that people are gunning for rather than somebody that's trying to climb to the top?
And I think the problem that Rory might run into is if he is champion, because the natural comparison that everyone makes is to George St. Pierre because of the camp and the friendship and all that stuff. St. Pierre had a defined A game. Yeah. He had something that he was going in there, and he didn't care who he was fighting. He was going to impose that game unless there were specific stylistic things that made him go somewhere else. And he adjusted his game as he went on. MacDonald sort of has an A game in his kind of like outfighting kickboxing style, but it's not nearly as defined, and he doesn't work nearly as hard to impose it. I feel like Rory MacDonald very much tries to be like a Swiss Army knife and like adjust himself to whatever's happening in the fight, and he doesn't always make the adjustment in time.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, he's come a lot. It seems like he's come a lot closer to losing fights or dropping rounds that he shouldn't. What, you know, even when, like, in his fight with Damian Maia, when Damian Maia was like gassed and Rory MacDonald was still getting hit and was struggling with Maia's takedown game. And Maia's a great, you know, a fantastic wrestler, much better than people think. But it was still this idea of, like, you know, what was your plan for this?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. Anyway, we should jump over to the TUF 21 finale now. Take a look at that. There's not as much top young talent on it. Frankly, it's just, you know, it's a fun card. I'm not like down on it, but there aren't as many guys who are young in the sport really coming up looking to make a mark on this card.
No.
The big ones being the tough fighters, obviously.
Yeah. And of all of them, I mean, I think no one will be surprised that I think we're excited to see Usman.
Yeah.
Because obviously he was our top welterweight prospect in the Bloody Elbow Sky Report, which is still happening. Don't worry, people. It's being worked on. I think the big thing here is the TUF finale. I think Usman's gonna be the one winning this going away. He's an elite level athlete, and he's leaned on his wrestling pretty hard from what I've seen of the show. I haven't been a diligent watcher of the show because I think you and I both agree that there's not a ton that you can take from TUF fights.
Yeah,
like
there really isn't.
I've watched a lot of Ultimate Fighter, and the one thing that struck me from like the first time I watched it is how different the guys look on the show versus in the finale, where you almost see a completely different fighter. And I think that happens for a variety of reasons. One of them being that Usman's going to be coming in a full camp, and if you compare him with Hassan, Usman is got much more potential in this sport. I think Hassan is like a guy who is like custom made to look good on TUF. Like yes. I think his way of fighting is just like perfect for. There's very little like the preparation that needs to go into it. I mean, like obviously a lot of physical conditioning and like working on it, but I mean the guy is pretty much a pressure fighter, throws big power hooks, and has decent wrestling, and is just a physical beast. Like that is like the kind of minimalist style that plays well on TUF. But like when you really get in there and someone is game planning specifically to beat you for a couple months, it isn't going to hold up.
Yeah, Hassan, I don't think he'll do poorly in the UFC. I think he could be a fun action fighter, and like, you know, he's a legit athlete and he's got power. But I don't know. I mean, Usman, you know, there is a reason we are so hyped on him. He's got a great wrestling background. He was a D2 national champion, and you know, tried out for the national team, was competitive wrestling with guys at level, even if he wasn't like, you know, even if he didn't make the national team, he was still somebody who was in there having good matches, wrestling well.
In Dana White speak, he was in the mix.
Yeah, he was in the mix. And the Black Zillions are giving him a really solid fundamental kickboxing base, and one that it's going to develop well over time. I don't know how well he can lean on that now, but the more camps he has, long camps he has, the better it's going to look. And it didn't look bad regionally. Like it was something that was developing really well before the show. Now, obviously, it's something that it takes a lot of time and preparation. It takes a lot of work. So you didn't see it on the show because it's something that you have to spend time working on.
Yeah.
But I would expect to see, I don't expect him to be outgunned anywhere by Hassan here.
Yeah, and I think you said it off air, but like the Ultimate Fighter's not the place you try out your new skill set in.
Yeah.
Like, especially if you're a wrestler. Why would you? It's only 2 rounds. You just have to get 2 takedowns and you've advanced.
Yep.
So, like, there's no reason for Usman to really have been looking to flex his striking or, like, try to grow his game on there because he had the wrestling to get through the show, and he did. So, I think Usman wins this one, and I think he ends up being a really interesting guy in the welterweight division. And I think you're right on Hassan. I mean, I think he can hang around. He can be an action fighter, but I don't think people should mistake him for like anything particularly special.
The other guy I want to talk about from this TUF season is Michael Graves, who's fighting Vicente Luque. Vicente. I don't know how Brazilians do the C. It's probably Vicente Luque. But Graves coming in, he was kind of like, I considered him kind of a dark horse wild card on that show because he has a lot of athletic potential. If you watch tape on him, like he is obviously a good athlete. He's tough and he's really aggressive. It just doesn't like, he looks like he didn't have any MMA background and he's working on everything. Like every part of his game is just really raw.
Well, I think he fits a archetype that you kind of point out of like the kicking grappler, where like he's got really nice back takes on the ground. He's a good athlete, and he is fairly technical on the ground, and then on the feet, he pretty much just tries to keep you on the end of his foot with like a bunch of push kicks and like up the middle sort of front kicks, and that's kind of his game right now. And I believe he was the first victim of Usman on the show, and he actually put up a pretty good fight.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of people coming back to us and saying they weren't really that impressed with Usman after his first fight. I think that was more of a function of it being like the first TUF fight, which, most guys' first TUF fight is fairly ugly. And the fact that it was against a fighter that was pretty good in Graves. And then Graves got back on the show, right? From like whatever weird thing they use to like bring guys back. They let people substitute out because I believe
Yeah, it was like this weird round, not quite a round robin, but almost a round robin kind of style. And he came back and he submitted Jason Jackson.
Yeah.
But he's like, he just has like I mean, toughness and aggression, especially when you couple it with a like decent athletic potential, is such a huge part of succeeding in the UFC. So I don't know. I think it's hard not to look at him going into a fight like this against somebody in Luke who, it just doesn't have a consistent game. It seems like he's the kind of guy who does well regionally and then does not do well in the UFC.
Yeah.
And so it's really kind of hard to look at that and think that Graves is not going to be able to beat him.
Yeah, I think Graves will be one of the ones that sticks around for a little while from this show. Yeah, no, this card, like I said, it's got some interesting fighters on it, but I'm most excited to see Usman.
Of course.
Just to see him get in there and what he looks like in the UFC after a real camp.
The other prospect we have to talk about from this card, Wonderboy. He is. I mean,
I am containing my excitement, Zane.
All right. But, okay, for somebody who, people have been up and down on him, some people way too high, some people really, really low. He started his MMA career in 2010 with, a regional USA kickboxing career behind him already at that point. He's in his early 30s, but, we should still be expecting Stephen Thompson to develop. Like, we should not have seen the best years of Stephen Thompson's MMA career at this point.
Yeah, I mean, because there was plenty for him to develop, in the sense that, like, I mean, what was it, like 3 years ago, he had no vestige of a ground game, pretty much. I mean, obviously, I think the biggest issue is that people got caught up in, and people are more aware of it now, or at least I think most MMA fans are more aware of the ability of the UFC to hype someone's outside credentials.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I mean, they've been doing it since UFC 1. There's been a mass inflating, but I think people really, Wonderboy was kind of one of those examples where like a whole generation of MMA fans were then woken up to the fact that just because the UFC says this guy was an elite kickboxer doesn't mean he was actually an elite kickboxer. So I think the people being massively overhyped on Wonderboy's striking have faded out. We've gotten a really good look at it. He is an interesting striker. He's a different striker. He's an effective striker, but I wouldn't put him down as a great striker in the division. He gives guys problems because of how different he is, and he has an ability to control range and throw good technical strikes, and it's different, which can count for a lot when you're dealing with striking, where you're coming up against a guy who just kind of like, when you're fighting him the entire time, it feels awkward. Like you're not really sure what's going to happen, and the guy does things at different ranges and in different timings and rhythms than you're used to. That can get you pretty far. So I think it will be interesting because Jake Ellenberger is not the most technical striker in the world. He's really strong. He's got really powerful. Just in general, he's a vicious finisher. But if he can't find the finish, things go south for Jake Ellenberger very quickly. So I think this is a really interesting fight where Wonderboy could start recapturing some of that magic, because I think he could frustrate Ellenberger to the point where Ellenberger kind of has the wheels fall off.
Well, and as we've seen in this, this is one of those things where, like, I don't want to say that Stephen Thompson is any kind of port for Rory MacDonald, because he's not. But I do wonder with like the way Ellenberger lost to MacDonald, if like that, there's just something about the style matchup of facing rangy, dangerous strikers that freezes him. And
I've always kind of felt like Ellenberger lacks ways to get in. He's looking like that's the big issue. Is if you're a good outside striker, you're going to frustrate Ellenberger because he really doesn't have a good way in.
No.
He's got a great right hand, obviously. I think he's most comfortable fighting in the clinch and like kind of like the quote unquote dirty boxing style. Like I think that's where he's most comfortable. If you kind of stick him on the outside and slow things down, on him and make it like a slow technical striking match, like that's, I think, when a lot of his holes really start coming out. And I think that's what we saw Rory MacDonald do. That's very much what we saw Robbie Lawler do, is kind of stick him on the outside and take him outside of his game and weather that early storm. And I think that's what we'll see Thompson do. Because, I mean, Wonderboy trains with some good people. He's kind of all over the place. He's in that New York scene on and off where, like, you know, there's a lot of good MMA on the East Coast, and it's all kind of like interconnected. Like,
yeah,
you can really travel around, because I remember specifically that he was the primary sparring partner for Chris Weidman in the lead up to the Lyoto Machida fight. And so he's kind of connected in with that whole Henzo Faraz circle. So I think it's very possible that we see, I think it's very likely we see continued strides made from Stephen Thompson, though I don't think we're ever going to see him become like the contender that people were expecting.
Yeah, that may not be, but I mean, the thing, especially in a matchup like this, is that he does have excellent ring craft. That's like what I think of it as.
Yeah.
Where like he always knows where he is in the cage. He's not the kind of fighter that gets stuck with his back to the fence a lot, or who just, you know, finds himself kind of chasing people with footwork and not really cutting angles and things like that. And that's, I think, the real benefit of his kickboxing background, is that he knows how to move and maneuver in a cage and in a ring. He knows how to cut people off. He knows how to create angles. He knows how to, you know, maintain space and all those kinds of things that Ellenberger has problems with. And so it'll be interesting. I mean, it's a great fight, because I think that it's, you know, it's a great chance for Stephen Thompson to get over, but it's still the kind of fight where Ellenberger could just like blitz in, hit a huge takedown, and like, you know, show up and reassert himself as a top 10 fighter.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Otherwise, I think the fighter I would otherwise want to talk the most about is really probably Kyle Magalhaes, who's fighting Josh Saman.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting fight. Obviously, Josh Saman, I think the emotional favorite over here at Bloody Elbow, writes for us. Very nice man, but he's got his hands full here. Magalhaes is a pretty nasty striker who seems to be figuring out. He seems to be figuring out his MMA game.
Yeah.
Very much on the fly in the UFC, which is not easy to do. And I think the same could be said about Josh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing with Magalhaes is still, you know, he's very young still. He's only 27. And it really seems like, and, you know, he doesn't have a lot of experience. He started back in 2009, but he's only got, 10 fights under his belt. And I think at some point in his UFC career, really, I think it was the fight probably against Nick Ring.
Yeah.
He came close to losing before Ring blew out his ACL, and Magalhaes was able to get back in it. It's like that was really the kind of the point where he realized that he needed to be a much more aggressive fighter to be successful in the UFC, because he's built like a gorilla. I mean, he's just like an absolute brick shithouse of a physical specimen. And he realized, you know, at some point he needs to be a much more aggressive fighter to win. And the aggressive version of him has just been like an absolute terror.
Yeah. I mean, initially he was kind of like, there was a whole mess of middleweight Brazilian fighters that were like hulking beasts that like didn't have a lot of aggression and kind of ended up having these terrible, awful fights that they would sometimes win. And I think he kind of stepped outside that, because the last two fights he has just blitzed guys and just destroyed them. And I don't think he's going to be able to do that with Josh. I think we're going to get I think Josh is the perfect guy to test this new Magalhaes and see if this is this just the case of him jumping on guys early, or is this a new fighter that we're seeing?
Exactly. Yeah. Can Magalhaes keep up this style for more than a round? Really?
Yeah.
Is like with the kind of aggression and, you know, output that he's creating early in fights. Is that the sort of thing? Because, you know, Josh is tough. He's got a good chin. He's not the kind of guy that gets, you know, knocked out easily or can be beat up easily. And so if Magalhaes can't knock him out early, does he fade badly? Or is he, because he's just like, he's got this great physical build, and I think he's got a lot of like fast twitch athletic ability. Is that something that he can carry on and just like be this bullying fighter? I mean, sort of, a more athletic version maybe of what we saw Antonio Carlos Jr. do, except of course Antonio Carlos Jr. is a much better grappler.
Yeah.
But still, like that was Antonio Carlos Jr. was basically like just a monster for 15 minutes of that fight, or 13 and a half before choking out Eddie Gordon. So it'll be interesting to see if, I don't know. I'm interested in Magalhaes. She was somebody that I was really down on early in his career. I thought that he was kind of getting, he was basically getting gifted with mediocre opponents early on and not looking good.
Yeah.
But it feels like since that ring fight, he's really turned a corner and has realized, I'm big, I'm tough, and I'm a good athlete. I need to start fighting to win fights.
Yeah, and I think it's there are a lot of fighters that could benefit from that. I think because I mean, like, he was indistinguishable from, like, I can't even. I'm trying to remember some of the other.
Bruno Santos.
Yes, yeah.
Hani Marks.
Hani Marks is the big one I always think of, where it's just like he looks like such a beast, and then he gets in there, and then just it doesn't feel like anything ends up happening.
Yeah.
And I think for him it's been a good transformation. I think Josh is a tough fight for him.
Yeah.
Because Josh isn't gonna go away when he's hit. And he's an aggressive striker in his own right. So I think that fight's going to be outstanding.
It is. It'll be interesting. It's a great test for both guys. I mean, it'll be interesting to see who comes out of it with looking better because, yeah, I don't know. I think Josh has shown himself to be the more consistent fighter over like three. We know that Josh can show up for 3 rounds.
Yeah.
And we don't yet know that about Magalhaes.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that leaves this is that for Magalhaes that's troubling is the fact that, yes, we have this more aggressive guy and like he's starting faster. We also in his last 2 fights have seen just over a minute of this new fighter.
Yeah.
Like, what does it look like if this initial rush is met and deflected? Does he fall back into his old patterns, or does he continue? Does he keep up the offensive? And I think that's the kind of question that Josh is going to be able to answer. And does Magalhaes have the technical ability to continue a prolonged, aggressive fighting style, or will it just end up being like, will it be something that, it's a skilled striker can then begin to counter?
Yeah, absolutely. Other than that, I mean, there are a few other fighters. Daryl Montague's been around for a while. Like Willie Gates, Dominic Waters, Gerard Sanders. They're all very much like prove something to me points of their career. Like Sanders especially came from a good wrestling background, but really has just like not shown anything other than wrestling. He gets submitted when he gets takedowns. He gets knocked out when he can't get the takedown.
Yeah.
He's very much just seems like a pure wrestler in MMA.
Yeah.
Waters is, from what I've seen on him, is kind of like a good athlete, but I just haven't seen any technical development in his game that like looks like any consistent technical development. Yeah. And then Willie Gates is just, I don't know, I'm not really sold on Willie Gates.
No. Not really a prospect, but I'm excited to see Michelle Waterson get in there.
Yeah, Michelle's been around for a long time. I'm glad she's getting a chance to go to the UFC. I thought it was interesting to see what happened to her last opponent, Erika Taburcio, against Ayaka Hamasaki, who beat Waterson, because it kind of showed that like Waterson does not have a consistent control game. Like she is not good at getting to control positions, keeping them, and working with them.
No.
And it'll be interesting to see how that plays into her UFC run, because I do think, obviously she's been set up to win this first fight pretty handily.
Yeah.
But as she gets back up to facing, the level of, even Jessica Penne again and somebody like that, like, will she be able to to win those kind of fights consistently. And I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
I have yet to be able to go back and watch last night's Invicta card, as it was directly over my jiu-jitsu gym time. But I heard it was pretty incredible.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
On that note, though, I think we've covered all our bases. So I'm going to sign us out. You can find me on Twitter at DZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find me on Bloody Elbow, Tom as well, writing up some awesome grappling previews of ADCC competitors and his, some good opinion pieces and all that. And we can, if you like the show, give us a like, thumbs up. Subscribe to MMANation.com for more of our video work. We're going to be doing the 6th round. We're going to be doing, we'll have Knuckle Up. We'll have Care Don't Care, all that stuff for the fights next week too. So keep tuning in. Thanks everyone for watching the show, and we'll see you next week.